All right, and we're live for another TNT education session coming to you after the Agri-Food Summit finale. We have one more Agri-Food education session for you before the spring. We wanted to chat a little bit more about how you convey value of an ag-based startup to non-ag focused investors, and kind of what the differences are between those two categories, and get some practical insights for some of the companies that participated in our program, but also maybe folks in the wider community. Maybe you're watching this recording or watching this live stream. That's what today's session is all going to be about. And so we thought, who better than Marlise Hunter from Tallgrass Ventures to come join us. Why don't you say hi, Marlise?
Hi, everybody. You're not sick of hearing from me yet from the Agri-Food Summit yet. One more shot.
Well, you always got such great insights, so we had to have you back. And you brought along your friend Hilary Kilgour over at Adoxa Ventures, the managing partner over there. How you doing, Hilary?
Hi, everyone. Great to be here with you.
Perfect. Well, I always start with you, Hilary, since you're kind of the new kid here on the block, to us anyway. Tell us a little bit more about your role at Adoxa Ventures and kind of what brought you there, and the thesis of your firm.
Great. Well, Jesse, thanks for the invite. It's great to be amongst many people that I know in this community, and many new faces. So I have been in this investing space for quite a while. I actually started in the VC space about 6 or 7 years ago, and our fund really came out of the need that we saw to invest at the intersection of climate and health. So Adoxa Ventures focuses on that key intersection, health, climate, and ventures that are really leading the way in that capacity. And our thesis is a bit unique in that we focus on women and non-binary led founders. So we really work to try and diversify who is getting invested in. But I also wear many hats, which essentially means I also work with the team at Mars Discovery in Toronto, and I also work with Venture Lab and a couple of other organizations to really help Canadian companies around investment readiness and get access to capital. So that's really what brought me to the space. I had the pleasure of being a part of early stages with many of the people in this room when we started our fund a couple of years ago, and we've made a couple of investments, and we are continuously growing. So great to be here.
Amazing. Yeah, great to learn a little bit more about you, and I'm excited to dive in as we get into the questions. But let's go over to Marlise quickly. Give us a quick reminder. Who are you, and what is Tallgrass Ventures, and what are you working on over there?
Sure. So Marlise Hunter, I'm the director of platform with Tallgrass Ventures. We're an early stage agri-food tech venture fund based here in Calgary. So we invest across all things agriculture and food, from inputs to hardware software solutions on farm and beyond. My role with Tallgrass is specifically around kind of how we lean in to add value to our portfolio companies. Being able to support our founders is really key to our thesis, and having an ability to lean in and help companies in agriculture build better businesses is really what our firm is kind of based around.
Awesome. Yeah, we've got some deals being done together. Just the most recent one with AgGene. Very excited about that, and looking forward to many more in the years to come. But we're talking here today about what the difference is between ag-focused VCs and maybe not ones that might invest in ag but not be ag-focused. Right. And Marlies, you've been around for quite a while in the ag investment space. You were over at SVG for a while before that. So you've kind of got a sense of this. So I'm going to start with you. So how can you describe how those investment priorities differ between, say, a firm like yours and a firm like Hilary's?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure our investment priorities will differ that greatly beyond thesis, right? Like thesis is very core to how every firm looks at their investments. And so for us and for other firms that are specifically focused on agriculture, it really is core to what we look at. But outside of that, I think really the investment priorities are going to be the same. Like, are these companies solving a real problem? Is there a market for their problem? And are they the right team to be able to solve for it? So we weight a company's applicability to our thesis, which is an agri-food tech company that's early stage, that's either based in Canada or has strong applicability towards Canada. And beyond that, I think a lot of the priorities will probably be similar, but Hilary might have some insights to share on that.
Yeah, just maybe thinking a little bit, Hilary, here on how startups might articulate, value as an agri-food founder to a firm like yours, or something similar, where they're not maybe focused on ag.
Yeah, and I'm happy to share based on working with hundreds of founders in the last few years, particularly in a climate that has been difficult. And I don't think anyone's going to sugarcoat that. I think there are three things that are ag, non-ag, and I'm going to speak from a non-ag perspective because we typically we have made investments in the space, but I wouldn't say it's our specialty from a value add perspective. So what we really are looking for is this founder the best position to solve this challenge? And so I think that is applicable across a lot of domains, but is this founding team the best team to be doing this work? And are they, second to that, going to be able to recruit a team around them to be able to solve and build and scale? The second piece is really looking at, do they have the vision? And part of that vision is the sustainable business model. So when we score ventures in our due diligence, we're really looking for, do they have a sustainable business model? And maybe what makes us a bit unique is not just, are they going to make money doing what they're doing, but have they thought through the unintended consequences of their growth? Like, have they really thought through, as we do this at scale, what are going to be the consequences that we need to mitigate as part of our planning moving forward? And then the third thing is, and I think this is true of all sectors, but I'm going to acknowledge that it's bringing in money. And it's not just bringing in money of investment dollars, it's bringing in the money to actually build the business. And whether that's, bringing in the non-diluted capital to be able to do an initial test pilot, to be able to test out and show viability in the market, or being able to just bring in recurring customers. Those are kind of the three key things that we're looking for from a founder and founding team.
Yeah, so kind of hearing from both of you is that there are these fundamentals that regardless of what sector you're in, you really got to hit on those, right? And at the end of the day, the market is always right, and if you can get those market conditions, go ahead. But part of this, I know, is a big struggle for founders is just getting folks' attention, right? And especially for ag startups, right? And for those non-ag based investors, how do you get their attention, Marlise? And when you're coaching and working with some of the ag founders that you work with, how do you help them get the attention of investors and help them actually find investors that might take that first meeting?
Yeah, I mean, I probably have a biased answer to this question because I really think it's about the positioning of agriculture, right? Like, people have a pretty baked vision of what that means to them. I can't tell you how many agnostic firms we've talked to who say that we're focusing on too niche of an area by saying we're exclusively investing in agriculture. I mean, the irony of that is crazy. This is one of the biggest industrial sectors on the face of the planet. It is an industry that influences literally every single person every day. We make decisions every day about the food that we eat. And so I think it really is like a rebranding almost, and a repositioning of what agriculture actually is. It's not someone standing in a field with a pitchfork. It really is from farm to fork, what all of the opportunities across agriculture look like. So I am biased because I think that this is one of the biggest industrial sectors, and it intersects with every single other industry: health, clean tech, finance, supply chain, all of that. And so when you're looking at an investor who doesn't necessarily focus on agriculture, what do they focus on? What is their thesis? What are they looking for? And then how do you, kind of find that red thread to lean into how your business could be applicable to the type of companies that they're looking for.
Love that. Getting some reactions in the chat there, Marlise. Love it. We're
Oh
gonna
no.
Hilary, yes, on that same topic, what you've worked with a lot of founders, right? It's just kind of thinking generally, how do you help them? What are some tips and tricks to help them get those hooks in, and maybe even for yourself when they're an ag-based company that grabs your attention in more of the climate side of things.
Yeah, I really do think it goes back to the basics at the end of the day. It's like really understanding the timing piece. Often we say, like, is the founder the best position, but also is this the right time to be doing this? And being able to communicate not only why this is the right time for your solution to be in the market, but also how it stacks up in terms of the competition. I often will meet with founders and have a conversation, and their understanding of the competitive landscape is lacking. And so I think that is a key piece, that like really understanding what's out there. And I think one of the pieces that's under valued when you're doing investment readiness is those 10 to 15 conversations with friendlies in your network, investors or others, to be able to say, hey, here's what we're thinking. How does this stack up versus what else you're seeing? What else should we know? What are the other valuations that you're seeing in this space? And really having those conversations to understand, how are you stacking up? And who are those people who are going to tell you before you go out to investors you don't know, who are going to tell you what other competitors are doing and where you kind of stack up? So I think those are the key pieces, is the founders that I really appreciate and who do, I think, the best in this space, and who ultimately are able to, and we've got a couple in our portfolio who have gotten investment from many other investors who say they're not ag investors, like really being able to articulate why this is the solution and why they are able to do it. It doesn't matter if they're an ag investor, as Marlise was saying, like you're going to get through to an investor to understand why you're uniquely positioned to lead in this category.
Awesome. Love that advice. And just thinking about, those case studies, Hilary, do you want me to double click on that? Like what are the sort of key things that those startups have done? And is there a particular tip or trick that a founder here can take away from this to try to emulate those founders that have been able to continuously raise?
Continuously raise is an interesting interesting slip. I think, I mean, it's the current market, and I very much acknowledge that a lot of the founders out there are doing bridge rounds, are continuously raising. And so let me just start with that piece, which is, yes, you're running your business, but if you have chosen to go down this path of taking on equity investment, you are going to be continuously raising for an extended period of time. So it is, the founders that I've seen do it the best are building those relationships from the start, and they acknowledge who are going to be the investors who will likely step up in those first rounds and who might step up in the second or the third rounds of investment. But they're really going at it from a perspective of building relationships first. So that I think that's maybe one of the most under valued. I'm seeing a couple of people on the call here that I recognize who I've had conversations with. And I think it's just that idea of, really getting to know investors and understanding what's important to them, following up with them. One of the best things that I've ever heard is, when you have a conversation and someone says their priorities are A, B, and C, and they come back to you, 2 months later and they report back on A, B, and H, like people do remember what you've said. And so being able to come back and give people updates is what builds that trust over time. And I think that's a really, really important piece, is to be able to do that follow-up or add people to that investor update. And so tangible things that I would say taking away is, as you're speaking to investors and building those relationships, getting to understand their thesis. I think this call started in a really great way of understanding that. The second piece would be understanding the timing of when their investments are, and asking them the best way to communicate updates along the way. So I always say, and I was saying this to a founder earlier today, like, Can I add you to my investor update? Check. Easy. You're going to get added to those pieces. Can you recommend 2 to 3 other investors that are going to be good conversations for us to have? And the founders that I've seen do this the best have really taken the time to understand who their ideal investor is, to articulate that, and to say it to an investor like, this is our ideal investor. Can you think of others in your network that we should be chatting with at this stage? I think those would be some really tangible takeaways.
Yeah, I love that work on finding that ideal investor. Marlise, I know you work a lot with your portfolio companies and thinking about, kind of getting to that next level. When you're thinking about, raising the next round and bringing on other maybe non-ag focused investors, what are you how are you helping and coaching them, and what have you seen to be effective with the companies you've worked with?
Yeah, I mean, realistically, I think every company we work with is going to have non-ag investors. That's just the reality of the situation. There is very limited firms in Canada that focus exclusively on agriculture, and that trend is pretty common around the world. I mean, there are quite a few more in the US and in other areas, but the reality is you're probably going to have investors on your cap table that know very little about the space. And so it really is about some of the points that, Hilary just mentioned. Being able to find a fit within a firm's thesis doesn't mean that it has to be an agricultural focused firm. Sometimes it just means there are ways in which a firm feels they can add value, or an individual investor feels like they can lean in. And that's good enough. They don't have to know the market. That's where it's your job as a founder to think about who you have on your cap table, and to think about the types of qualities that you want in investors. And when you do have an agricultural focused fund that maybe knows your market and has connectivity to offer, well, then maybe you can start thinking about the other type of capital providers and what sort of value they might be able to bring into you as a leader, and your company as well. But in terms of us specifically with Tallgrass, I think, you know, like I said, it's really key for us to be able to reduce friction for our founders. It's a hard knock life out there, and so if there's any way we can help to build relationships through our firm, and help expand the reach of our portfolio companies into other jurisdictions, into other customers, into other capital, then that's something that we do as a team and as a firm. So we're always looking to build partnerships into other jurisdictions, and we look at who's a part of our portfolio. We try to find like-minded investors that we also want to be along for the ride with. We also look to where we think we have some strengths as a firm, and where we know that there are others that do it better. And so we are constantly in the process of trying to find others to co-invest in or co-invest with. We are a pre-seed, pre-Series A firm. It's very unlikely that we're ever going to be able to take an entire round, which means that we always have to co-invest alongside other firms or other individuals. And just like we're, looking at the founder, is this someone we want to be with for the next 5 to 7 years? We're got to look to our left and to our right. Are these investors ones that we want to be along for the ride with as well? So I think there's a number of different elements that go into that, but building relationships with capital providers, regardless of their sector focus, is critical both for firms and for founders.
Love that. Yeah. That was a great explanation there. Love the emphasis on partnerships. This program actually, and being able to do this education session today, is supported by the Sustainable Canadian Agricultural Partnership. It's a federal, provincial, territorial initiative with the government of Canada and the government of Alberta. So strategic partnerships right there. And just thinking about strategic partnerships, so one of those sort of maybe ag focused investors, or maybe non-traditional investors in agriculture, can be corporate partners, right? Strategic partnerships with them. Sometimes they invest in companies. Just thinking, maybe generally speaking, Hilary, you've been around for a while. What do you think about taking investment from corporate partnerships, or working on strategic partnerships as part of a round where maybe you're giving some equity to a supplier or a buyer of your company?
It's a great question, and I'm gonna take a few moments just to draw a parallel to why I think this is so important. So, as I was preparing for today's call, I knew that my roots were in Alberta, but also in agriculture in Alberta. So, I am not pretending that I am an agricultural investor by any means, but I found out that my grandparents met at University of Guelph, learning agricultural science, and moved to Alberta, where they were the first. They did the first dairy farming in Alberta when Alberta became a province in 1905. So I say that in saying I think everyone in Canada has some connection to agriculture and the importance that agriculture plays in our economy. And so I just wanted to pull that thread as we think about partnerships, because at the end of the day, and I love what Marlise said around partners, not just as your investors, but as your co-investors, is that you want people at the table who have the same common belief of what you're trying to do. And so you want to identify partners, whether corporate or other, that have the same invested interest for where you're going. And so I can certainly think that there have been instances where corporate partners have been at the table as potential investors, where the interests have not been aligned, whether that's their own business drivers or why they're investing, that they probably weren't the right partner to be at the table. But I also, in sharing that example, my great-grandfather became one of the first public servants in Alberta. There is a value of partnering with entities who have shared interest in advancing what you're doing. And so in this context, I think it's really understanding what are the motivations of the partner and why are you doing it? And so the question, and I learned this from a founder, that she always asks before she finishes any deal with an investor, and I think this is one that I always take away, is what are you hoping to get out of this? Because if those interests are not aligned, then you are going to have problems down the line. But if they are aligned and you've had the conversations, then it is a partnership where there is strategic value, hopefully down in the future, and it goes beyond just the surface level.
Love it. Yeah, you're gonna double click here on it, but I just want a quick reminder for everyone. If you got questions, jump in. We're gonna be here for just about over half an hour still. So lots to discuss. We got people sharing contacts and making friends there in the chat. Love to see that. But yeah, if anyone wants to jump in with a question of our two panelists here, happy to ask it either from the chat or have you come off mute and ask it yourself. But Marlise, going to come to you while we hopefully grab some more questions. Double clicking on that idea, that's a great question, Hilary. I love that sort of tactical takeaway there, like using that question, what are you hoping to get out of this? Thinking about working with, say, some of the corporate partners that you see often in ag, your John Deeres of the world. Sometimes there can be that positive alignment, but maybe they're trying to sort of snag something from you and learn kind of from the inside and then replicate it themselves. How do you sort of navigate those potential treacherous waters, Marlise, where there could be a big reward, or there could also be somebody potentially suing your company in some way?
Yeah, I mean, I think it really depends on what the company is building and how they're building it. A lot of the deep tech and science that we see that are building businesses around strategic patenting are companies that need to be really cautious about these types of partnerships, because when a lot of the value of the company is tied up in something that could potentially be replicated or brought in-house somewhere else, it's something that a lot of founders really need to be cautious of. So I love Hilary's point around what are you hoping to get out of this partnership, because you really need to be clear that there is value that you're deriving from working with a corporate strategic, and that's not always the case. Might be nice to have a corporate venture arm on your cap table, because it does show and validate a little bit that you're on the right track. But I do think it is something to be really clear on. It's not always a good thing, and it's not always a bad thing. I think there are a lot of really great collaborations that have happened as a result of strategic partnerships between early stage founders and corporate strategics. I think founders and smaller companies are able to be more agile and to pivot and to build in a much quicker and faster environment. And that's not something that's always the case in big companies, especially in agriculture. There's been a lot of companies coming together. There's only a handful of big ones that exist out there, and so turning a big ship can take a lot of effort. And so there really is there's opportunity to be had on both sides, but it is something to be cautious of.
Yeah, those are some great points there, and yeah, the patentability and understanding the treacherous nature potentially of those corporate partnerships is very important. We got a couple of questions coming in. I got Mike McGee from Bioenterprise Canada. What are the key impediments to successful commercialization of agri-food tech? What do we do well? What do we need to improve on? I don't know who wants to jump in first. Marlise?
Sorry, the key what?
What are the key impediments to successful commercialization of agri-food tech?
I think, oh, Mike, way to load up a question for us right out of the gates. I think that as an ecosystem, I mean, agriculture is a really complex supply chain. So it's not as simple as plugging in an ag tech or a software platform and having it broadly adopted. I think one of the key impediments that I have seen, and that kind of did a disservice to early stage ag tech, was where a technology is being adopted isn't always where the value is being received. And so that's where a conversation around ROI has gotten a little bit muddied over time. It might be a technology that a farmer needs to adopt, but the value of that technology being adopted is actually derived in the middle of the supply chain or from someone a little bit further upstream. And so I think being clear on where a problem lives and where the return on investment is something that's been a challenge, but is starting to be solved. I think capital is a problem for most startups, not just agri-food startups. I think a lot of early stage companies get pulled to where their capital is, and it makes sense why that happens. But I think there's been a tremendous increase in the amount of early stage capital that's available and accessible in Canada and into early stage agri-food tech companies, but we still have a really long way to go.
Yeah. Hilary, I don't know if you want to add a little bit onto that, your experience with like seeing agri-food commercialization and where do you see the impediments, especially I guess comparing that with more traditional, maybe not so much software B2B SaaS companies, but even like climate tech startups that have that, or other deep tech startups that maybe have that longer path to commercialization.
Yeah, so two thoughts, and just building on what Marlise said, because totally agree with what she shared. One is, I would say, a conversation that I've had a lot in the Canadian marketplace recently is, or at least the investment landscape in Canada, is if an investor understands technical expertise and building towards commercialization, then that is cross-applicable, I would say. So that is something to take into consideration, like hardware. You're seeing investors in different spaces talk about deep tech. Even some of the health tech investors like understand that pathway to commercialization. So it is cross-transferable. If they're open to it. But I will say that I was working with a founder yesterday going through a list of investors, and it was like SaaS. So, SaaS is very different than understanding the pathway to commercialization. And so making sure that the people you're speaking with understand that is going to be a key one. And I don't want to take away from that piece. The second part of that is was also having this conversation with someone who's actually on the call today. And I think there's this element of when you get money to spend on trials, tools, and to build out that pathway to commercialization. So for instance, the $10,000 test, there needs to be a discussion around ROI and driving towards ARR. And so actually having, that recurring revenue conversation, even for a $10,000 test, you have to be able to show something from that. And I think that is a piece that is really critical for any investor, is to be able to see that. And maybe something that I'll share is the success is great, but also as an investor, we want to hear where you failed and what you've learned, because that's actually what builds the trust and the ability to support a founder along the way. We can't help you if you're not telling us the full story. And we're not going to be able to move forward in that value add way that Marlise was speaking to if we don't know the full picture. And in the landscape, it's not all rosy, and we know that. There's a big part of, we got into this because we recognize that it's hard to build businesses, and we want to be allies and supportive in that process.
I'll also add that we've done agriculture a bit of a disservice by applying a venture model that was built for B2B SaaS into an incredibly complex industrial sector, right? There's longer sales cycles. It tends to be more capital intensive. There's the risk of weather and climate and seasonality. There's all of these different compounding factors that push down on agriculture that don't push down on pure tech. And so when an early stage investor who maybe isn't familiar with this space is saying, well, we want to see returns on our investment within 3 to 5 years, but the reality of that happening or being able to scale a more capital intensive agricultural startup is just not realistic. And so I think, for us, we view it as needing to be more patient capital, as applying that same model to agriculture maybe isn't the most effective path forward. And we've seen some of that with a lot of the where early stage investing has gone in agriculture to date. You've seen it in alternative protein and Beyond Meats. You've seen it in controlled environment ag. These are really capital intensive industries, and trying to apply the same scale and model of a software has created some challenges as well.
Wow, we've got a flurry of activity coming out of these last few answers here. Loving it. I'm gonna
be kind to us.
Yeah, I love it. No, these are good questions. I'm gonna try to navigate through these and just figure out where. And since we're on the topic, I like Pam Bailey's question here. To kind of double click on this conversation. Are we at a perceived disadvantage for labeling ourselves as ag? There are a lot of folks removed from the farm or where their food comes from, and there's a general disconnect. So because we're smaller in numbers, that leads to being misunderstood. Thoughts?
Yeah, I think that it comes back down to the narrative a little bit. You can certainly paint yourself in a corner by talking about agriculture in a way that other people don't understand. And I think it is really important to be able to tell a narrative and create a linked chain to that individual. Food is something that influences everybody. And so how your business or how an agricultural business relates to that individual, I think, is really key. I always talk about it as go get out of your bubble, talk to someone who knows nothing about agriculture, and see if they can articulate your value proposition back to you in under 2 minutes. And if they can't, then you haven't done a clear job of being able to articulate what your company does and how they do it. And you're going to get the exact same feedback from another capital provider who doesn't understand what you're doing. Doesn't mean they're not the right investor to be on your cap table. There's probably a lot of operational or strategic advice, to Hilary's point. A hardware is a hardware is a hardware. If someone scaled hardware businesses, that's definitely applicable into agriculture. But you need to be able to be sure that your message is being translated appropriately. And I think that's really been a challenge for a lot of agricultural companies and a lot of people in agriculture, period.
Yeah. Hilary, you want to add on to that? And from your perspective as a non-ag focused investor?
I'm going to add on to it by referencing Neil's question. I think the one piece that I think non-ag investors don't get is the seasonality. And so I think that's a really key thing. And it actually ties to what Marlise was saying, is to educate. Like, I don't think you want to veer away from it, because that obscures from the reality of your business, but you want to find a way of including that in the narrative that speaks to the seasonality that I still think a lot of investors don't fully understand. But I think once you make those connections, investors were hopefully smart enough to understand and work with you around that, because every business has challenges. Every business has a different form of seasonality. To be able to just name it, I think, is really powerful.
Awesome. Looks like Pam would like to come in here with a follow-up on the question.
Yeah, we've been doing a lot of philosophical thinking in the office these days, and I was just curious because I'm like, should we not be ag or should we be manufacturing? Because my company kind of flirts in between, and it's been interesting because manufacturing goes back to ag, but ag for some reason is this own little bubble. So I'm just curious, is it hurting us or making it better? Just some weird thoughts.
I'll maybe take a stab at this one again. I don't think it's hurting us. I think these types of philosophical questions need to be had. I think having these types of conversations outside of maybe an agricultural bubble is where the opportunity is. We need to get more people involved in understanding that there's a role and a perspective and a space to be had in working in agriculture. I really do believe agriculture is at a nexus point between all of these other systems that we interact with. And so it is a really important space. And I don't think we should shy away from it, but I do think we need to participate in a narrative that goes beyond what people perceive traditional agriculture to be. And I mean, you look at in the context of Canada alone, Canada is a very commodities driven economy. When we talk about agriculture, we talk about the exporting of raw commodities. We don't talk about value added processing. We don't talk about what comes next. And I think there's just so much opportunity for Canada and for individuals who feel like they don't have a space or a role to be involved in these discussions to participate.
Awesome. Well, we got a question here from James. I don't know if you want to come off mute and just ask it yourself, kind of follow up on that last question a bit.
Sure, I don't mind. Thanks, Jesse. Yeah, I went to a show just recently where there was 120 different food products, and I found that all of those food products, even though we're talking about the differences and more relative things, I mean, it's like percentage values between things, and it's the next best thing on earth. And a lot of them were getting a lot of funding and stuff like that. But what I'm finding is that we're losing our focus on where the real food values are. We're not, we're creating something in a box rather than actually focusing on ground crops and other crops. If that makes sense. And I'm just wondering, is it like, are we really shying away, from true agriculture in the sense of like, I mean, there's a study that just came out right now that that's floating all over the place that strawberries are the most chemical product on the market. But now we're creating, I mean, I just went to this thing where they were doing freeze-dried strawberries, in candy. And I was kind of like, well, why are we freeze-drying strawberries in candy when we can't even fix the base problem? And investors are moving into that market because those companies are making hundreds of millions of dollars. As compared to like tens of millions.
James, it's good to see you. And I'm happy to start by saying, I think it still goes back to the ideal investor alignment. And I had this conversation with a founder earlier today. I think it's about values and mission alignment at the end of the day. I think there's a misnomer that it's about impact investing, but what's perhaps more important is understanding the mission of the organization and making sure that it's aligned with the investor, but also values. And so it doesn't take an impact investor to have values around what's going to be important and what isn't. And it also doesn't take a particular mission focus of an organization. And I think our fund is an interesting example of that, where we say health and climate, but we've made 3 investments in food-based businesses in different capacities, right? So it's like, it really is finding that fit around, I would say, mission and values, but also making sure that it's going to be a value add relationship.
Mm-hmm. I would also say that I think ag and food is a sum of all parts game. I think it's very much about looking at our current system and trying to identify ways to improve it. There have certainly been some negative unintended consequences of industrializing a living, breathing system like agriculture. And I think there are a lot of really smart people that are looking to fix some of those challenges. But we also have a growing global population, a rising middle class, and people who are more interested in different types of protein and different types of ingredients. And so I think it's both. In fact, we believe that it's both. There is a space for alternative proteins. There is a space for new types of ingredients and how those ingredients are being made or upcycled. I see sustainable in here somewhere. I think it's both. And so I don't think we're shying away from what traditional agriculture is. We very much still need all of that, but it's also an and conversation.
Love this philosophical discussion. This is going to be a great one. Going back through some of the questions here, we had one on support systems from VCs, and just maybe I'll kind of think about that is when you're looking for investors, how do you find the right support for founders, and what does that actually look like from the other side? And I'm sure we've all heard your tales of maybe being sold one bag of goods from a VC and then receiving another. So maybe let's just open up the doors a little bit more widely, pull back the curtain on the wizard, and hear a little bit more about what actually happens with VCs and the type of support that they can give to companies. Hilary, we'll start with you on this one.
I will start by saying that I learned about this from the story of Mary's Crackers. And I don't know if anyone's ever heard the story of the woman who created Mary's Crackers, but she tells a classic story of investor and founder misalignment, which ultimately led to having to remove two of their investors from their cap table and ultimately from their board. And so having heard the stories that many of us have heard about lack of alignment, I think in many ways is what brought me to the sector, but also what brought our way of looking at value add to the surface. And so I'll say that Startup TNT, Tallgrass, and our fund all were incubating actually at the same time. And we were having these same conversations together around how do we make sure that our value add is unique, but is also centered in like who we are and the value that we have to offer at the table. And so we've been fortunate to have these conversations just as founders are having these conversations, because it's really important for teams to have had those reflections. We just added a new GP to our team, Raisa. I know she was at an event with you recently, Raisa Espiritu, who's actually Alberta based and in Calgary. And so every time you add a new team member, you have those conversations again, is what is our value add? What are we bringing? And for us, it's really come down that we are all operators and come from an entrepreneurial background. And so we understand what it means to build, but we also have deep networks and have seen this in a recurring way that we can not only support founders through the very difficult process of building a business, but we can help make the inroads to partnerships and to other investors that we've spent the time building those relationships in the ecosystem. And I think the big part, because our focus is on supporting women-led and non-binary founders from diverse backgrounds, is really understanding that we don't want to see all of us on a cap table. We actually want to bring a diverse cap table to the founders. So we want to work with founders, not just on their first raise to bring together a great group of investors. We want to help them with that second raise, that third raise, and potentially that fourth raise where we are following on and supporting them along the way, but making sure that we're bringing value to the table as investors and valuable other investors to the table along the way.
Yeah, awesome. Keep going, Marlise. Go ahead.
Yeah. Ditto. I fully believe in everything Hilary just said. For us, that was the reason we got into Tallgrass, was we really thought that beyond capital, early stage companies needed like real help. And so we spent a lot of time trying to find what we call value added alignment, because misalignment is a very real thing. And it's one thing, for us or for me to stand up and say, well, we're a added investor. We made X number of connections, or this, that, or the other thing. But was it actually received as value? Was it actually perceived value? And so we spent a lot of time getting to know the founders, getting to know the companies before we invest, because sometimes we're not always the right people to be on a cap table. How a founder wants to be supported may not be aligned with how we want to support them, and that's okay. But we would far rather figure that out before we invest. I'm sure they would far rather figure that out before we invest, so that we're not going into a new relationship expecting things from each other that the others aren't able to show up and perform. And so that's really something that we take very seriously in our diligence. And then, beyond that, I think it's really important for us to be able to stand up and audit ourselves. Once again, it's one thing for us to say we've done all these things, and we're here to support in a variety of different ways. But I really think that proof is in the pudding. We want our founders to choose us as much as we choose them, and to hold ourselves accountable to the things we said we were going to show up for. So there's things we think we do really well, and then there's other things that we think there are a lot more smarter people that have built businesses around supporting founders in that way. And so we dig in a very kind of strategic and operational perspective. And then obviously we have the benefit of being exclusively focused in one sector. And so we have a lot of deep relationships with customers and capital, and peers that are going through similar challenges or have done it before. And so we think there's a lot of connectivity and value we can add through that.
Of that. Love seeing that support. We got a question there in the chat about sectors, thinking about that overlap between clean tech and ag. Coming to you, Hilary, right? How do you suggest, should ag founders be focusing in on or leveraging up on that in their story and really hitting on that sustainability aspect? And maybe even talk to maybe some of the potential troubles of kind of pushing too hard on that versus just focusing on the ag impact side.
Yeah, I will start by saying I was speaking with another investor in the space that many of you would know today, and they said that the food and ag space was where they were able to raise the most capital as a fund than any other space. And so, it's all a matter of perspective, right? Like there is capital that is being raised and deployed in the space, and yet, and I will say the same as someone who invests in women, it's still not enough. Right? Like there's capital there, but there is still not enough being allocated to key industries. And so the second part of what I would say is there, like strategically, and because I do a lot of investor readiness, there's two parts of this. One is, have you identified your ideal investor with the skill sets that you are specifically looking at? So going back to the conversation that Marlise and I just had around the value add, are you clear about what you're looking for? Because it's not always the ag experience that you're looking for. It might be sales, it might be enterprise relationships in X market. So getting really clear about what strategic skill sets and value add you're looking from an investor is, I think, the most important piece to start it. And then the second, as you're going through a list of potential investors, and we all know at the early stage, and Marlise and I, we both work at that early stage. I think we're at that seed stage. I didn't share very clearly, but we invest at the seed stage, which means most founders that we are working with have already gone through either one raise already, or they are mostly getting their investors from family foundations and angels, and we might be one of their first VC checks. So when you're going through that list of investors, I think it's important to contextualize it's not all just VCs. Like a lot of them are going to be angels, family offices, and then a few VCs sprinkled in there. And so very few angels and family offices state their verticals of focus. That does take time to figure out, and through conversation, where do they focus? What are their motivations? And then the second part is, I would say, go back to what are you actually looking for from that investor. And if they have cross-applicable areas and they're willing to invest in you, then it's always worth a conversation. But it is going to come down to whether there's an alignment around value add. So I hope that answers the question, but I'm curious to hear Marlise's take on that.
Yeah, Marlise's take, and then we got Terry for a quick question.
Yeah, I think, I mean, you never want to try and be the square peg trying to find a round hole, right? Like, I think it's really important to stay true to who you want on your cap table and who the right fit is. I think the opportunity for an agricultural based company is that it has the luxury of kind of being square in the discussion around sustainability, economic sustainability, social sustainability, environmental sustainability. And so it really does, just by the nature of the space that it is, intersect with so many different theses. And there's so many different types of capital out there, which I think is a really important point to highlight, that not every early stage company should be sourcing venture capital dollars. It's just not always the right fit, especially in agriculture, especially when companies do have a lot of capital intensity tied to their growth. And I don't think that is a narrative that's often like cleanly discussed within Canada and within our ecosystem. But I think it does a lot of founders a disservice. And I know I kind of went off on a tangent in a different direction. But yeah, I agree with everything that Hilary says, basically. What she says, I say.
I love it. I love it. Terry. Yeah.
Yeah. So, Marlise and Hilary, question, either in your experience of raising funds or dealing with founders, the conversation today is kind of interwoven with the conversation around VCs in a general bucket. Conversations I've had recently have suggested that one of the challenges in ag is just the return that the funds are looking for. It's longer, it needs to be more patient, and it doesn't fit the traditional VC model. And so a lot of people are asking, will those that are looking to venture into this space actually have the wherewithal to stick it out? Or will they bail and move to their more traditional because they have a 6 or 8 year horizon versus ag, which is whatever, 10 years plus, again, within context. But any sense of that in your conversations, or any kind of advice you'd give the group here as far as what to consider? Because again, we talked about matching, aligning, and one of the things is, whether some of the traditional folks that are investing in software and tech are also expressing interest in ag because they see there's sort of a natural progression, but the timelines differ. So what have you seen?
Yeah, I think that goes back down to, some of the complexity around this particular space and applying a model that doesn't necessarily fit to companies that are going to have a longer pathway to liquidity. And so that comes back to really understanding who these investors are, what their capital deployment window is, what their expectations are for a return on capital. If you are, a more capital intensive agricultural startup company, or you think it's going to take a couple of seasons to be able to truly build up your customer base, well, it might not be a fit for someone who's looking for an exit within 3 years. And so it comes back down to that alignment. Like, there needs to be alignment in the understanding of how you plan to return that investment back to the investors, and is it in a timeline that fits the horizon of their fund? And understanding that and asking those questions to VCs. How long is your fund? What are your expectations for liquidity or for an exit? And having those conversations up front.
Can you guys, each of you comment, what do you guys, what horizon are you each working within your funds?
Hilary, you want to
Marlise?
Yeah. Go ahead,
Yeah,
Hilary. Oh, sorry.
Oh no, that was my dog. Marlise, you go ahead.
Oh, sorry.
That's okay.
Yeah, so we are a 10-year fund. We did our first close, about a year and a half ago. So it's important to understand when that kind of cycle starts. So we're about 1.5 years into deploying capital for our fund. And so it is something to consider, right? You know, deep tech opportunities that may take, a number of years to be able to find or navigate a regulatory pathway and get to commercialization are ones that we're probably going to have to look at now, because the later we get into deploying capital, the shorter period we have to make the returns for the fund. And so I think what the technology is and how that fits into the lifespan of a fund is important to understand.
Yeah,
Yeah, and I'll
no,
just I will echo Neil's comment in the comments.
Yeah.
My dog is very eager about this one too. But I think the key part is most funds are 10 years. Our 10-year hasn't started yet because we haven't closed our first fund. So we have deployed capital already, but we haven't closed our first, which is why like having these conversations are so key, is that you want to be able to have those conversations when they're able to do that first deployment or second deployment, so that you have that 10-year, like we are very conscious of that. It's something that we consider all the time around looking at our portfolio of potential investments in our own pipeline. And I think the second piece I'll add is that what we're seeing in the Canadian landscape right now, and it was a conversation I had this morning, is the technical knowledge around some of the solutions is holding people up in making decisions. So you'll often hear investors say like, it's too early, or I don't fully understand. They're not going to say I don't fully understand, but they're looking for someone else who has the technical knowledge to validate that what the founder has said is actually true. And so what I would say is having those expertise, or those people with the deep expertise to validate the technical side of what you're saying, is so valuable in the current market, because it helps you speed up, I think, some of the decision making along the way.
Thank you. And that brings us to the end of our time. Thanks, Terry, for the last question there. Bringing us home. This has been great. Let's give a round of applause to Marlise and Hilary here for spending the hour with us and helping teach us. Thank you very much to the partnership between the Agricultural and Irrigation Ministry and the Investment Attraction Team for helping provide some funding to make this happen, along with a program for a number of Alberta-based ag companies. So if you're an Alberta-based ag company on the call and you'd like to maybe spend a little bit more time with TNT and learn a little bit more about how to get your pitch deck ready, convey messages, get some direct feedback, please reach out to me, Jesse at startuptnt.com, and we'll be deploying that program as I mentioned, and thanks to the funding from the Ministry of Irrigation and Agriculture, or Agriculture and Irrigation, I should say. Yeah, thanks again to everyone for attending, and please have a great rest of your day. And yeah, thank you again to Marlise and Hilary. This is fantastic. Great session.